The steam from my espresso curls upward, dissolving into the pale light that leaks through the window. Outside, Vienna is quiet under a thin veil of snow. The city feels distant, almost too calm for the stories that live inside my head. My name is Venorica, I'm 22, and I study criminal psychology at the University of Vienna. People assume I chose this field because I'm fascinated by human behavior. The truth is simpler and darker. I just wanted to understand my mother. Every morning begins the same way. I sit in this small apartment in District 7, the radiator hissing like an old whisper, the walls breathing with the weight of memory. I tell myself I'm safe now, that the past is just a set of coordinates I no longer belong to. But safety has a strange silence, it echoes. And sometimes in that echo I still hear glass shattering, a woman screaming about art, and the smell of burnt cigarettes mixing with winter air. When I was 11, my world existed in shades of gray, like an old film missing half its frames. The people who were supposed to protect me were the ones who broke me. I didn't know it then. I thought chaos was normal, love was hunger, and survival was obedience. Now, as I look into my reflection on the espresso's dark surface, one question keeps circling in my mind, one I've spent years trying to answer. When did you realize your parents were failing you? For me, it wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 small ones, each quieter, colder, and lonelier than the last. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. Prague was never beautiful to me as a child. People romanticize it, the cobblestones, the Gothic spires, the Vltava glinting under the Charles Bridge. But for me it smelled of damp walls, cigarette smoke, and loneliness thick enough to chew. My mother, Lucia, used to say the city was too clean for real art. She wanted chaos, colors that bled outside the lines, walls that cracked like skin under pressure. Maybe that's why she fell in love with a man who painted the world as if it were always burning. She had been a brilliant architecture student once. Sketchbooks filled with buildings that looked like they were breathing. Professors said she'd go far. But in her third year, she met an Italian painter named Raphael in a gallery near Nemesti Miru. He told her that lines were cages and she believed him. Within months she dropped out, sold her drafting table, and followed him into the kind of life that doesn't have a plan. By the time I was born, Raphael had already disappeared, leaving behind only a few unfinished canvases and a box of amphetamines. My mother called him my first masterpiece. She said it like a confession, or maybe a joke that only she found funny. We lived in a basement apartment in Venorica, the kind of place where sunlight came filtered through iron bars. The ceiling dripped in winter, the pipes groaned like animals, and the walls peeled in strips, revealing past lives in every layer of paint. My mother called it her studio. I called it the locked hell. Every morning at 6 sharp, she turned the key in the door and left. Sometimes she went to the market, sometimes she vanished for days. She said it was dangerous for me to go outside. Too many eyes that don't understand art. So she locked the door from the outside. I learned the rhythm of that lock. One click, a pause, then another. That sound meant solitude. It meant I had 12, maybe 16 hours to myself before I'd hear her stumble back. The air thick with the smell of turpentine and burnt metal. At 11 years old, I knew how to boil potatoes and mash them with expired butter to make something that vaguely resembled nedliki. I knew how to wash clothes in the kitchen sink and hang them across a frayed wire stretched between 2 lampposts outside the window. I even knew how to make the silence bearable, by talking to the cracks in the wall, pretending they were maps to somewhere else. But winter was the worst. The cold slithered under the door and into my bones. I would wrap myself in a blanket so thin I could see the light through it, pretending it was my mother's embrace. Sometimes, when the hunger gnawed too deep, I'd sneak into her drawers looking for coins or crumbs. Most of the time I found nothing but sketches, cigarette butts, and tiny plastic bags with white dust still clinging to the edges. When she came home, her pupils were the size of planets. Her hands shook as she mixed paint, smeared it across the walls, the floor, even her skin. She'd laugh, cry, then collapse, whispering words in Italian I didn't understand. Once I asked her what she was drawing. She looked up at me, her eyes wild and shining. "A place where everything makes sense," she said. I didn't ask again. There were days when I didn't eat. At school, I sat in the back near the radiator, stealing warmth from it. My classmates wore clean clothes and carried lunchboxes that smelled of fresh bread. I used to imagine what that felt like, to open a box and find comfort inside. That's how I met Jakub. He was the kind of boy who never worried about anything. His mother was a lawyer for the European Union. His father owned a Swiss bank. Even his smile looked expensive. Every day he brought a lunchbox that wasn't just food, it was color. Red apples, green cucumbers, golden sandwiches wrapped in foil. But what caught my eye wasn't the food. It was the crisp bills he kept folded inside. A casual allowance he never even noticed. The first time I only took 50 korun. My hand shook as I slipped it into my pocket. I told myself I'd buy bread, milk, maybe cheese. But when I got home and showed it to my mother, she stared at me like I'd handed her a miracle. "Where did you get this, Veru?" "I found it," I lied. She smiled, that trembling manic smile. "You're my little angel," she whispered. "You always bring light when it's dark." She didn't buy food. She left. When she came back, there was that smell again, the sharp chemical sweetness of methamphetamine, the way it burned my throat even from across the room. She kissed my forehead, her lips cold and trembling. "You saved us," she murmured. I smiled back, even though my stomach screamed for something real. That night I learned something unspoken. Love in our home had a price tag. The next week I took 100, then 200. Each time she told me I was her miracle. Each time her eyes looked less human. The walls of our apartment began to fill with strange shapes, faces melting into color, bodies without heads, windows without rooms. It was art, she said. But to me it looked like madness drawing on plaster. Sometimes she would talk to me about Raphael. "He saw me," she said. "He didn't want to fix me like everyone else. He wanted to watch me burn." I think that was the closest she ever came to love. One night, I woke to the sound of her singing. The melody was cracked, fragile. I walked into the living room. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by broken glass, painting over the shards. "It's beautiful, Mama," I whispered. "Do you really think so?" she asked. "Yes." She laughed softly, then began to cry. I didn't understand that both were symptoms of the same disease. At school, the teachers began to notice the bruises. Not from beatings but from exhaustion. My clothes smelled like smoke. My handwriting trembled. But nobody asked. Not until Miss Hannah. She was my literature teacher, tall, calm, with the kind of voice that could quiet a room. She used to be a journalist, they said, before she saw too much. One afternoon she called me to her desk. "Venorica," she said, "Jakub's wallet went missing. Do you know anything about it?" My heart stopped. I lied, of course, but she didn't press. Instead, she asked me to stay after class. I sat in the small teacher's lounge, eyes fixed on the floor, waiting for her to call the police. But she didn't. She returned with a plate of Tridelnik, still warm, dusted with sugar. She placed it in front of me. "Eat," she said. I hesitated, then took a bite. It was soft, sweet, and warm, the opposite of everything I knew. She watched me carefully, not judging, not scolding. Then she asked, "What's your favorite food in the world, Venorica?" "Rice with ketchup," I said through a mouthful of pastry. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know why. 3 days later, there was a knock at the door of our basement apartment. My mother was sitting cross-legged on the floor, a metal spoon heating over a lighter. The air was heavy, like the moment before thunder. I remember the shouts, the crash of the door splintering, the red and blue lights slicing through the darkness. She screamed, "Don't touch my art." Hands pulled me back, voices shouting in Czech. I was too stunned to cry. The last thing I saw was my mother being dragged out, her wrists in metal cuffs, her eyes wide and hollow. They put me in the back seat of a gray Skoda Octavia. The heater blowing too hot, the plastic seat cold against my legs. Outside, the blue lights flickered against the snow. My mother's voice echoed behind us, hoarse, broken, calling my name. I looked out the rear window until she disappeared into the blur of color and noise. For the first time, I felt the weight of silence without her. It was heavier than any lock she'd ever turned. And in that silence, something inside me cracked open. I didn't have words for it then, but I understand now. Sometimes love doesn't save anyone. Sometimes it just burns everything down. The first time I saw Aunt Elena, she was standing outside the social service office in Prague, wearing a navy coat that looked too clean for the hallway we stood in. Her hair was tied back neatly, not a single strand out of place, and her eyes, pale gray, sharp but kind, scanned me the way a doctor reads an X-ray. She didn't rush to hug me. She just said softly, "Venorica." I nodded, clutching the plastic bag that held everything I owned. A worn sweater, a cracked hairbrush, and a small wooden angel missing one wing. She crouched down, her voice calm and steady. "You can come with me if you want. I live by the Vltava River. It's quiet there." It was the first time in years someone asked if I wanted anything. My mother never asked, she told. And when I didn't obey, there were consequences. Slaps, silence, or the long nights locked inside the basement apartment, counting the cracks in the wall. Elena's house was nothing like that. It was perched above the riverbank, white curtains floating like soft ghosts in the window. There was a smell of soap and fresh linen, the opposite of cigarette smoke and turpentine. A large piano stood near the living room corner, covered with photographs. None of me, of course, but I didn't mind. At 11, I had already learned not to expect belonging. Safety was enough. When she showed me my room, I froze. A real bed with a blue duvet and a small lamp shaped like the moon. "This is yours," she said. I nodded again, but that night, when she turned off the light and closed the door, I slipped out of the bed and crawled underneath. It was instinct. Concrete floors had taught me that danger came quietly, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in daylight. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to the sound of footsteps and soft humming. Elena was kneeling beside the bed, her voice threading through a lullaby in German. Slow, melodic, almost like a heartbeat. She didn't ask me to come out. She just kept singing, until her voice became the only sound that mattered. For the first time, my body unclenched. Later, I'd learned that Elena was a cardiac surgeon, the kind of woman who lived with precision and patience. Her world was measured in heartbeats and seconds, yet she somehow found space for me. A girl who spoke little, flinched at sudden noises, and hid her food under the pillow. She never asked too many questions about my mother. She only said once, "Lucia was brilliant." But brilliance without peace becomes destruction. Then she stopped, as if the sentence was too heavy to finish. Our routines began quietly. She'd leave early in the morning, her shoes clicking against the tiles, and return late, smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender soap. But every evening, she'd sit with me by the window overlooking the Vltava, 2 mugs of hot cocoa between us. She'd ask simple things: what color I liked, what music I listened to, what I dreamed of doing when I grew up. I didn't know how to answer. Dreams had been luxuries in my mother's world. So instead, I watched her reflection in the glass, steady and soft, and began to imagine that maybe, just maybe, life could exist without fear. One winter evening, I spilled cocoa on the tablecloth and panicked. My hands shook, my breath came fast. I started apologizing again and again until the words tangled in my throat. Elena didn't scold me. She just took my hand gently, wiped the table and said, "It's only a stain, Veru, not a sin." That sentence broke something open inside me. I realized then how much of my childhood had been built on punishment, on the idea that being loved meant being forgiven only after pain. But Elena's love didn't come with conditions. It was simple, almost surgical in its clarity. Care without control, warmth without demand. Weeks passed, and I began sleeping on the bed instead of under it. She noticed but didn't mention it. Sometimes on Sundays she'd play Schubert on the piano. I'd sit beside her, feeling the vibrations through the floor, as if the house itself had a heartbeat. Once she caught me watching her hands move across the keys. She smiled and said, "You know, the heart isn't the only organ that keeps rhythm. Sometimes love does too." It took me years to understand that line. Lucia had given me life, but it was Elena who taught me how to live. She didn't birth me, but she chose me. And choice, I learned, is a deeper kind of love than obligation. Blood can create you, but choice keeps you alive. The night I finally whispered good night before turning off the lamp, I saw her pause at the doorway, smiling faintly. She said nothing, but in her silence, I felt the first true version of safety. That's when I understood. Healing doesn't begin when the pain stops. It begins the moment someone shows you that you deserve more than survival. And that someone for me was her. She didn't rescue me from the past. She simply stood beside me until I realized it no longer defined me. And maybe that's what love really is. Not saving someone from their darkness, but staying long enough for them to see the light on their own. The phone call came on a rainy afternoon, the kind of gray day when the whole city felt submerged in fog. I was 17 then, taller, quieter, and still living with Aunt Elena in the White House by the river. The years had smoothed the edges of my fear, but somewhere deep inside, the little girl from the basement still held her breath whenever the phone rang. When I picked it up, the voice on the other end froze me midair. "Vero, it's me. My mother. Lucia." Her voice was softer than I remembered, hoarse, almost broken, like she'd been trying to hold the world together with trembling hands. "I'm calling from a rehab center in Brno," she said. "They're letting me start over. I've been painting again. I just need a little help to finish the program. Then I'll come for you. We'll go to Venice, remember? You always wanted to see the water there." Venice. That word cracked open 1,000 forgotten promises, childhood sketches of gondolas and blue canals she once painted on our apartment wall. I could almost smell the turpentine again, hear her laughter before it all dissolved into smoke. I wanted to believe her. More than anything, I needed to. For a week I replayed that call in my mind, memorizing her tone, convincing myself that maybe, after all these years, redemption was possible. She told me the rehab center required a deposit, something small, just enough to release her early for family custody. Elena was at the hospital that night, her shifts growing longer as the winter thickened. The house was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. I opened her jewelry box, the one she kept locked but never hid. Inside there was a small gold ring, simple, elegant, engraved with the initials L. I hesitated, staring at it, the weight of guilt already pressing down my spine. But then I heard Lucia's voice in my head. "We'll go to Venice, Vero. Just you and me." By morning the ring was gone, along with the few bills I'd taken from her wallet. I told myself it wasn't stealing, it was saving. Saving the mother who once called me her angel. When Elena came home I tried to act normal, setting the table, pouring tea, pretending my heartbeat wasn't racing. But she knew. She always knew. After dinner, she sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her face was unreadable, calm in that frighteningly surgical way of hers. She placed the open jewelry box between us. "Do you want to tell me where it went?" she asked quietly. I swallowed hard. "I'll give it back. I just need it." "For your mother?" I nodded. The truth spilled out in fragments. The call, the promise, the dream of Venice. I expected anger, maybe disappointment. Instead, Elena just looked at me with a kind of sorrow I didn't know how to bear. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "Venorica, your mother doesn't need money." My breath caught. "She needs you hungry," Elena continued, her eyes never leaving mine. "She needs you desperate, because that's how she survives. If you stop bleeding for her, she disappears." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "You don't understand, she's trying this time," she said. Elena reached across the table and took my hands. Her palms were warm, firm. "Listen to me. I've seen dying hearts restart on my table, Vero. I've seen what real healing looks like. What your mother is doing isn't healing, it's feeding. She needs your hope the way an addict needs a needle." Something inside me cracked open. I wanted to scream, to defend Lucia, to tell her she was wrong. But a part of me knew she wasn't. 2 days later, the truth arrived cruelly and fast. The rehab coordinator, who had called to confirm the transfer, was a scammer. The police caught him posing as a social worker, extracting money from families of addicts. Lucia had vanished. No rehab, no return address, not even a goodbye. I remember sitting on the front steps of the house as the officers drove away, their taillights dissolving into the mist. The silence that followed was suffocating. The ticking clock inside the house was the only sound left. Steady, merciless, like a metronome marking the death of illusion. Elena came out and wrapped her coat around my shoulders. I didn't cry. I just stared at the river, at the way its surface reflected the sky, dark and endless. "I thought if I loved her enough," I whispered. Elena rested her chin lightly against my head. "Love isn't supposed to make you disappear, Vero. It's supposed to make you more visible." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. No more Venice. No more promises. Just the quiet realization that my mother wasn't coming back. Not because she couldn't, but because she chose not to. It wasn't hatred that filled me then, it was clarity. The kind that burns slowly, like truth seeping into an open wound. I realized my mother had failed long before the drugs, long before the lies. She had failed the moment she chose her chaos over my safety, her escape over my existence. The next morning, I returned the ring to its box. I stood there for a long time, watching the gold catch the light, feeling its weight in my palm. I finally understood what Elena had meant. Some people don't want to be saved. They just want to keep dragging you into the fire to prove they're not burning alone. That was the day I stopped waiting for Lucia to love me. The music stopped that night. No more soft piano, no lullaby. Only the steady tick of the clock and the quiet hum of a house that had survived one more storm. And in that silence, I made myself a promise. I would never again mistake pain for love. 5 years passed like a long exhale. By 16, I was taller, stronger, and for the first time good at something that wasn't survival. Basketball had become my anchor. A place where motion meant meaning, where I could run until the noise in my head went quiet. That year, our school, Gymnasium Transplanted, won the Prague District Championship. When the final whistle blew, I lifted the trophy high, and for a moment, the gym erupted with cheers that didn't feel borrowed. I wasn't the girl from the basement anymore. I was the captain, the girl who could win. A week later, the letter came. It arrived in a thin cream-colored envelope, with my name written in a slanted, uneven hand I hadn't seen in years. My heart skipped. Lucia. Inside was a short note, written in blue ink. I'm working now. At a bakery in Brno. I have a small room and a cat named Kafka. He's lazy like I used to be. I'd like to see you if you'll let me. Café Slavia. Next Sunday. Noon. I read it 3 times. Her handwriting trembled like the edges of an old photograph. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, pity, hope, fear. They all came crashing together like waves against the old stone walls of memory. Elena didn't stop me from going. She just said, if you go, don't expect to find the mother you lost. Expect to meet a woman who's trying to learn how to live. The next Sunday, I stood outside Café Slavia, the famous one facing the Vltava River, where poets and broken dreamers used to meet. The sun was sinking low, spilling golden light across the water. I saw her through the window, Lucia in a gray sweater, hair tied neatly, a cup of tea before her. She looked smaller, human. The chaos was gone from her eyes. When she saw me, she stood abruptly, almost knocking over her cup. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled, a careful, trembling smile that seemed to ask for permission. Veru, she whispered. You came. I nodded, sitting down across from her. For a long time we just looked at each other. The silence thick but not unbearable. Then slowly, she reached into her bag and placed a folded envelope on the table. 8,000 koron, she said softly. It's yours. The money you took years ago. I worked extra shifts to pay it back. I needed to make it right. I stared at it, my throat tight. You don't have to. I do, she interrupted gently. Because it wasn't your fault. None of it was. You were just trying to save me from myself. She slid another item toward me. A stack of handwritten pages, about 7 of them, neatly stapled together. The first line read, for Veru, the one I almost destroyed. I hesitated, then began to read. She wrote about her own childhood, the father who abandoned them, the mother who drowned herself in vodka and cheap perfume. She wrote about studying architecture and meeting the Italian painter who promised her a world of color, but left her with only shadows. She confessed that meth had been her way of silencing the guilt, that every time she locked the door, she told herself she was protecting me from her own collapse. And near the end, she wrote a single sentence that broke something open inside me. You are the only thing I ever did right, even though I did it in all the wrong ways. When I finished, I couldn't speak. My mother, the woman I had both loved and feared, sat across from me, fragile but real. There were wrinkles at the corners of her eyes now, tiny lines that seemed carved by regret. She reached across the table, not to touch, just to rest her hand near mine. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just wanted you to know that I remember. Every door I locked. Every lie I told. And that I am sorry. Outside, the afternoon light was turning amber. The surface of the Vltava shimmered like melted gold. I looked at her hands, calloused, no longer trembling, and something in me softened. Maybe forgiveness isn't a grand gesture. Maybe it's just sitting across from the person who broke you and realizing you no longer need to bleed to understand them. We talked until the cafe lights came on about small things, safe things. About her cat, my exams, the smell of fresh bread. There were still gaps between us. Wounds that words couldn't reach. But the silence between those sentences felt gentler now. As we stood to leave, Lucia smiled faintly. "Venice can wait," she said. "Maybe one day when we've both learned how to stay." I watched her walk away down the riverside path, her shadow blending with the fading light. The air smelled faintly of sugar and smoke. When I stepped outside, the last sunlight slid across the river, spilling warmth over the city. For the first time in years, the Vltava didn't look cold. It looked forgiving. And in that golden light, I understood. Redemption isn't about rewriting the past. It's about choosing again and again not to let the past define who we become. Vienna feels different in the winter. The air is sharper, the streets quieter, as if the whole city exhales in unison. I'm 22 now, a final-year student in criminal psychology at the University of Vienna. My apartment in the 7th district is small, barely enough for a bookshelf, a desk, and a plant that refuses to die, but it's mine. My mornings start with espresso and silence, and somehow that feels like peace. My mother, Lucia, works as a shift manager at a Lidl in Brno. She still has the same old cat, Kafka, who sleeps on her laundry pile and ignores the world. We don't talk every day, but on the first Saturday of each month we meet halfway, at Praha Hlavní na Draci, the central station. She brings apple kolis still warm from the bakery. I bring whatever research I'm working on. We sit on the same bench near platform 4, surrounded by the echo of announcements in Czech and German, and talk. It's not the kind of love that fixes everything. It's quiet, measured, a kind of truce that doesn't erase the past but no longer lets it rule the present. Sometimes we talk about ordinary things, Kafka's new hiding spots, her coworkers, my internship. Sometimes we just sit in silence. But silence now isn't empty. It's full of understanding. My internship is at the Children's Protection Center of Prague. It's where I spend my breaks between research and reality, listening to 11-year-olds who flinch at every knock on the door, who still think hunger is normal, who still believe love must hurt to be real. I see pieces of myself in each of them. The trembling hands, the over-politeness, the way they call adults sir and ma'am even when it's not required. I tell them the same thing again and again. Love doesn't mean sacrifice. Love means choosing life. They don't always understand it right away. Neither did I. But one day they will. Elena still calls me every Sunday night. She asks if I'm eating well, if I'm resting, if I'm still playing basketball. Her voice is steadier now, more playful. Sometimes she sends photos of her patients' thank you cards, sometimes recipes I'll never cook. She doesn't say she's proud, but she doesn't have to. I feel it in every word she doesn't say. Sometimes when the night gets too quiet, I think about the house in Venorica, the one with the locked doors and the cracked walls. I don't remember it with hatred anymore. Just distance. Feels like something that happened to someone else. A girl I used to be, who learned too early what abandonment feels like and mistook it for destiny. Now when I look in the mirror I see her still, but she's standing taller, breathing easier. She's not waiting for anyone to choose her anymore. As I sit by my window, the golden light from St. Stephen's Cathedral spills gently into the room, turning the steam from my coffee into a soft halo. Outside, the snow drifts like memory, slow, silent, forgiving. I think about my mother, her small apartment in Brno, the cat that still curls on her chest when she sleeps. I think about how she's still trying, still living one day at a time. And I realize that maybe forgiveness isn't a finish line. It's a rhythm you learn to walk to. I survived. I chose to live. And that, I think, is the quietest form of victory. If Venorica's story touched you, share your thoughts below. Tell us about the moment you realized, not every parent knows how to love the right way. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because here we explore real stories, where every wound hides a way out.